Alrighty, let's take a look at the first lecture of the week, structured inequality, looking specifically at sports and sexuality. Before we get into the talk, a little bit of a reminder for next week. We're going to be starting in week 5. Again, this is next week, not the current week. Next week, we're going to be starting the work on our final paper. So between Saturday and Monday, starting up the early parts of next week. In addition to doing the readings, be sure to review the final paper guidelines, look over what I'm looking for, start thinking through ideas. By Tuesday, that's at the same time as when your reaction post is due, also post a final paper idea. This is sort of big concept, basically a single sentence of what you're wanting to do or what you're wanting to look at. I'll give some feedback on that. By Thursday, you'll have a discussion post as well as the final paper outline. So here we're starting to put a few more ideas down onto paper, really mapping out where you're going to be going with the final paper. Week 6 is devoted entirely to writing your final paper, but we do want in week 5 to get a good foundation in. Also in week 5, you'll have your final application post due on Friday. All right, so that's the week 5 program, just something to be thinking ahead, looking ahead. If you want to start reviewing those final paper guidelines, now would be a perfectly good time to do that as well. All right, let's get into the actual reading. So the opening section is really looking at norms versus deviance. So we have regular deviance, I'll call it, from social norms, things like violence, harm, crime. We've talked about quite a bit in terms of fan behaviors, perhaps, or athletes' behaviors, deviating from social norms. And most often, deviance is seen in a negative connotation. So we can also deviate from the norms by being exceptionally good or exceptionally positive, more so than the average. So the norm you might think of as average or expected regular behavior. So it can be positive or negative in terms of how we've been speaking about it. Most often, though, when people think of deviance, they think of negative directions, again, violence, harm, crime. Sexuality deviance is in many ways very similar. It's something different from the norm. It doesn't necessarily have to have a connection to violence or harm to others, like we see with violation of regular social norms and fan and athlete behaviors, but oftentimes it gets looked at in the same way as some sort of threat. Something that is different is seen as a threat or potentially violent or harmful to others. When we're breaking norms down, it's important to understand our concepts and our categories of what we're specifically talking about. So gender norms are that women look and act feminine, men look and act masculine. Sex norms are that women have female parts and men have male parts. And sexuality norms are that women have sex with men and men have sex with women. So those are three oftentimes overlapping or connected sets of norms, but they are distinct elements, and violating any of those three is really moving the viewer or the outsider towards seeing that as a potential threat. So those are the three areas that get focus in the reading. Next, we're going to talk about Caster Semenya. And the idea here is that the highest level athletes in any sport are almost never middle of the road athletes. Perhaps decades ago in things like baseball or bowling or golf, you could have a middle of the road athlete, but typically we see the highest of the most elite level physical gifts, work ethic, mental capabilities. All of these are coming together when we get to the level of professional athletes. So they're already physically gifted to the point of freakishness. And again, that's almost regardless of sports, WNBA, NBA, NFL, golf, tennis, they're all huge and strong and fast, way more so than us average humans. So that brings us to our first discussion prompt for this week's lectures. How do we explain, you can think of it as societies or America's, or if you want to just think of it as our inability to accept the freakishly strong, good, fast female athletes. So there doesn't seem to be a problem accepting a freakishly strong or fast male athletes, but female athletes often get described as too mannish, unfair advantage over other female athletes, not ladylike. How do we explain society's approach or view of these incredibly strong good athletes, female athletes. So take a second, go over to your discussion post and post your first prompt. All right, and that brings us right into our second prompt. So the reading also talked about values regarding segregating sports by gender. So I'd like you to discuss this as part of your discussion prompt number 2. So discuss potential values of segregating sports. So you'd be making a case effectively for having boys play on the boys team and girls play on the girls team, middle school, high school, college, professional sports, Olympic sports. I'll go through those 5 categories and discuss the values of segregation by gender. And then the next step is discuss values of combining athletes in competition at various levels. So what might be values of combining them at middle school or even younger, high school sports? Are there some sports that you can combine more easily? College, pro sports, and Olympic sports. And then after you've done that so you first is seeing the value in segregation, and second is seeing the value in combining. And then third, are there places where we don't perhaps need the segregation that's there? So looking over those first 2 elements of your prompt, are there places that would work if men and women or boys and girls played alongside each other? Are there places that would work out? Hop over to your discussion post, complete that, and then come on back. All right, next the reading moves into changing the game, homophobia manifestations. And for those that perhaps don't know the history as much, for a long time now, and perhaps still the case, attacks on female athletes have often been sort of laced with "you're a lesbian," and that is something historically that has been a very negative thing to say to someone, or a threat or a challenge that immediately puts them on the defensive. So there's been some approaches to how athletes or how participants have handled that. The reading goes into the 6 most common. First is silence, don't ask, don't tell, we just don't talk about that, or outright denial, there aren't any on our team, or no, I'm not. Apology by sort of dressing pretty or dressing up maybe more so than you'd want to sort of prove to the world that you're a norm abiding woman. Promote the sexiness or the sexy women on the team, and I use air quotes there. Obviously that's a very subjective term, but we might think of this as sort of who are the team members that get put up on posters, or who are the ones that are featured on promotional materials, marketing materials. And again, that goes right into the 4th item, the promotion of heterosexy images. So you sell female sports through sex. So rather than maybe a promotional poster that shows them in competition, it's a very staged poster with them away from sort of the grit and the grime of actual competition, and dressed up, cleaned up, whatever the case might be, and using sexuality to sell female sports to fans. 5th is outright attack on lesbians. So there's a strong history of anti-lesbian policies and practices amongst teams and leagues, organizations. And then the final is the preference for male coaches, men shown as smarter and safer than women, which obviously isn't the case for all humans. If you're ever a victim of violence, there's a strong likelihood that a male is the one that executed that violence against you. Much more likely to be assailants than their female counterparts. But anyway, the defenses against these attacks have often been one of these 6, and one of those is that preference for a male coach, seen as sort of safer than a female coach. All right, so 3rd, discuss these prompts. Are they still currently in use? Do you see examples of them? Are they prevalent? Would you say they're trending up or trending down? So there's six of them: silence, denial, apology, promotion of heterosexual image, outright attacks on lesbians, and preferential treatment or preference for hiring male coaches. Can you think of examples of these? Can you find examples? Discuss whether you think these things are still prevalent or still happening. Go ahead and hop over to your discussion post for this 3rd one, and then come back when you're complete. All right, next they move into on the team, focusing on transgender athletes, transgender participation in sports. Here the reading really stresses the importance of awareness, education, equal opportunity, pointing out some of the nuance and some of the challenges of transgender athletes, and stressing the importance, especially in high schools and colleges, of equal access to participating in these sports. We've talked for a number of weeks now about the potential values in sports, along with some of the potential pitfalls, but largely speaking, some of the values that athletes get out of sports, and having that available for all athletes. So our fourth discussion prompt: should high schools and colleges be seen as flagships for American values? So that the idea here is that this is where values get highlighted from the majority, and sort of placed in, and they're sort of showcases of, here's our values, here's what we value. Why or why not should high schools and colleges be seen as flagships for American values? What risks might be present if we rely on high schools and colleges to reflect our values? The other side of this is, should high schools reflect the current position, or which would be the flagship of American values, or of the majority, or should they be more forward thinking and be pressing for sort of future, sort of forward thinking, progressive thinking? Should they be pressing forward, or should they be reflecting kind of the status quo in America? So take a moment to talk about these two main items, and then the first one has a couple sub items underneath. And then third, should media reflect the current position of the majority? Oh, wait, I think I already had this. Sorry, this one's on here twice. Just so the first two for your, oh, I'm sorry, the third one is the media reflection. I didn't have it. Oh, going crazy today. All right, so should the media reflect the current position of the majority, or should they be progressive minded? So the second one is for high schools. Third one is for the media. Apologies for that. All right, so hop over to the discussion and then come back when you're done. All right, and then into a discussion prompt 5. So this is a very discussion heavy lesson. So the authors laid out 3 primary assumptions or fears regarding transgender athletes. First, that they're not real girls or real boys, depending on which direction they're going. There's an unfair advantage for male to female athletes, and then that males effectively cheat the system by going through this very challenging or difficult transition. So here's your discussion prompt. Is this a problem about people just not knowing the facts or fully understanding the issues regarding transgender athletes? Or is there something else that people actually understand all that goes into it, but there's something else that is leading people to bristle at the idea of a transgender athlete? Particularly, folks tend to bristle at the male to female athletes and that competitive advantage argument that the authors laid out. So talk about this. Is this a problem about not knowing the facts about transgender athletes and that transition, or is there something else going on that leads to this sort of combative stance that many people have regarding unfair advantages of male to female? So talk about that, and that will be the last discussion prompt and last slide of this lesson. Be sure to do the next lesson before you submit your discussion post.